Greetings, everybody. It is I, obviously Jesus, here with the second Patreon video for the month of September 2018. How could I forget? I want to say a big thank you for the very positive response on last week's video where I covered, being another year older, dealing with the depression that comes from that and all that stuff. But now we are back to the suggestion box as well. Today we're going to be taking a suggestion from a longtime patron Double. And he says, "Hey Jesus, I have a suggestion for a video. I believe you touched on it in one of your old YouTube videos, but that was a long time ago. It's basically the debate of intelligence versus happiness. Which do you believe is more important? And would you rather be blissfully ignorant or despondently intellectual?" Now, I'm going to answer the first portion of the question right off the bat. Also, I am a little bit sick, so I'm going to try to make this brief, although I say that in every single video, and it always winds up being 35 to 40 minutes. So I'm gonna try to make this brief, but it's probably not going to work. I'll answer the first question right off the bat, though, or the first part of the question, as to which you believe is more important. I don't believe that there is any objective, of course, importance to either, intelligence versus happiness. I believe that it's a perfectly valid decision or a perfectly valid trade-off to make in your life if you pursue intelligence at the cost of your happiness, if you are conscious of what you're doing. Although I will say that I believe most people would probably say happiness is more important, and that goes a little bit hand in hand with the biological answer to this question, because I think that the human body naturally pursues, of course, intelligence it pursues naturally happiness in the form of dopamine or other chemical releases in your brain rather than intelligence. And of course, gaining intelligence for many people, especially younger people, as I'll talk about in the main body of the video, is often a path to happiness. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but I believe that as most people get older and age and mature and get a sense of the bigger picture of life, or just how small that picture is, they do become more mutually exclusive, if not totally mutually exclusive, and they do have more of a negative correlation, if not a direct one-to-one inverse relationship. I don't believe they have a direct one-to-one inverse relationship, but I definitely do believe that as you get older, as you become more practical, as you become less, not high-minded necessarily, but as you become less interested in acquiring knowledge just for its own sake and learning for its own sake, they do sort of become opposed to each other in some way. But yeah, I don't believe that any particular one is more important, or that there has to be a choice. I think ideally there wouldn't be a choice, but the main body of this video is going to be me talking about the fact that there obviously is a choice, or there is sometimes an opposition that you unknowingly stumble into without even making a choice. So we're going to talk about that. But yeah, I do think the body, if there is one true answer, I think that it's probably happiness, because the body pursues happiness more directly than it pursues any kind of intelligence. So as to the question of whether or not I would rather be blissfully ignorant or despondently intellectual, I wasn't actually sure in the beginning that I could turn a whole video out of this, honestly. But yeah, I wound up writing quite a lot about it, so let's get into that. So, personally for me, if I had a choice about it, if I were an omnipotent being, or if I were a being with a lot of foresight from a very young age, I would very much choose, I think at this point in my life, as you might guess from the content of my previous videos, I would very much elect to have a much simpler life if that were possible at this point. Or, I think even better would be to be induced into a medical coma state where I could lucid dream and have complete control over my reality, like Inception and whatnot, where Leonardo DiCaprio's character and his wife, played by what's her name, French actress, I think it's Marianne Cotillard, but yeah, he and his wife in the movie Inception spend their entire life or an entire lifetime in a sort of dream state where they can manifest anything in their world. They could be gods, essentially, and I would like that. I would like, if that were even remotely possible, to be put into a medically induced coma and just lucid dream and have a life completely of my own design, completely of my own making, and just live in that state until my physical body expired, when I'm sure without any warning it would just stop. But yeah, I think that, that's just a fancy conceptual way of me saying that I would definitely prioritize happiness over intelligence if I could go back with the knowledge I had now and do it all again, so to speak. When I was younger, of course, like most people, I enjoyed gaining new knowledge. I was really ecstatic about it. I loved learning. I approached the world with this sort of natural curiosity that most young people have, and mine was certainly even more acute than that of other people or other kids my age. Some people, very lucky people, I think, and, there is some sort of choice in here. I think it probably has to do a lot with parenting and peer groups as well, and, what kind of teachers you have. But then again, I had pretty supportive parents. They were always supportive of my schooling, at least, even if they were total failures on the emotional side of things. But my parents are always very supportive of my schooling. I had some great teachers, and I never really had bad teachers, although in my junior year of high school, I had this class called, this is totally irrelevant, but funny story. I had this class in 11th grade called Studies of War, and it was literally just a teacher who would put in like a movie of like World War II, or like we literally watched Saving Private Ryan as the class. It was more of a film class than a Studies of War class. It was just like the most janky, terrible, cut corners public education thing. That the school district had no idea that it was literally just watching movies. It was hysterical, and I think I just took that class because I needed to fill some time in my schedule. But yeah. Anyhow, completely unrelated to that, some people are very lucky and they get to keep their natural curiosity throughout their lives. I think that, you see a lot of scientists who retain this curiosity. Neil deGrasse Tyson is somebody who still has that childlike characteristic. You can see it when he does interviews. He's actually probably one of my favorite guests on Stephen Colbert. If you watch his interviews with him, that he's just ecstatic. He loves talking about it, and he can go on forever in this sort of like pseudo Asperger's-y way. Although I don't want to be one of those people who says that any person who has a passion and is a little bit nerdy has Asperger's syndrome, which is not even a formal diagnosis anymore in the DSM, the latest DSM. But anyway, that's really neither here nor there, because for most people, that sort of natural inclination and natural curiosity fades as their lives become smaller in scope, and they realize just how much, or how little rather, of that knowledge they'll actually need or use. And as they get older, more practical concerns take over, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that it is a jarring transition for young people who once enjoyed learning, like myself. Excuse me, I'm sort of like dying here, but it's a pretty jarring transition when you realize finally that you're not going to be using a lot of that knowledge that you gained. So as you might expect, when I was in school, I was rewarded quite well with praise and seeing grades on my report cards. That sort of, it's pretty little in terms of, actual correspondence to reality, but, it was enough for me back then. I was rewarded for having all the knowledge I had, and then regurgitating onto whatever format of test might be put before me. Again, that's great, of course, when you're young, but it really failed to outlast the realization that I had later on in about 11th or 12th grade that I'd never really used most of it. Honestly, personally, can't think of anything that I learned beyond 9th or 10th grade that is of any particular use to me today beyond, literally trivia. It might be useful to me if I went on Jeopardy and tried to be the next Ken Jennings. But beyond that, I don't think that I would say probably over 90% of what I learned beyond 10th grade has no pertinence to me whatsoever in my life, and even higher percentage for college, especially considering that I ultimately did not pursue a career in what I majored in college, and of course I wound up dropping out as well. And as I've talked about in other videos, I'm not going to spend any more time belaboring the point here. I am rather bitter, I think, that it took me 11 years of schooling to realize that I couldn't see the world, the bigger picture, beyond the carrot in front of my face. The carrot being praise from teachers, the carrot being seeing grafting my sense of self for whatever reason onto a report card. And I think that goes back to having a shitty home life. You'll put a lot of your self-worth into school because you have more control over that environment, because it's an environment unlike your home life where you can actually put in good stuff and have good stuff come out. So school is great in that way, but I am a bit bitter that it took me so long to see that there's a whole other world out there, and what I learned in school was not particularly pertinent to it. Now, to get more into the main meat of the video, though, I want to try to quantify, or rather qualify, what knowledge is useful and which knowledge is detrimental, because I do think that it is sort of categorical as to what kind of knowledge helps you and what kind of knowledge harms you. Like I said, there is no, one-to-one inverse relationship between all types of knowledge and unhappiness. There is no correlation that's that simple to pinpoint. I think you have to sort of try to categorize the types of knowledge that you're going to pursue and focus on the good ones and try to avoid the bad ones. And, ideally you wouldn't even think about the bad ones. They would just, pass over you undetected, I think is the goal here. But as for what types of knowledge are useful, I have 3 or 4 different categories of useful knowledge that I think are distinct from each other. I would say that, number 1, of course, is just basic practical knowledge. It's a big umbrella term that covers, functional things you need to navigate your day-to-day life. How to cook, how to feed yourself, clothe yourself, take public transport or drive, you tend to your hygiene, anything that goes with, taking care of your body, being a normal, cleanly human being. This also includes knowledge that you need to do your specific job, basic logic, like I've talked about in previous videos, and maybe more adult stuff like how to do taxes and stuff like that. So that is I know it's general, but basic knowledge that has no higher meaning to it is just stuff. It's just, basic stuff that has no downside. It's just helpful to you in life. And the second type of knowledge I think is useful is mechanical knowledge. This is a more niche and more specific type of knowledge, essentially how to fix stuff, to take stuff apart, to understand how it works, and then put it back together again. I think that's an extremely important type of knowledge, really useful in life to, just have the skills to take care of your stuff, like your car, your your house or your apartment, and fix stuff like that, and not necessarily rely on other people to do that. It's really just generally useful and has no real downside, again, aside from maybe, being known as the handyman in your social circle or your family and people asking you to fix stuff for them. But I mean, that's not really a downside. It's all goes in hand with having a nice sense of community that we'll talk about later in the video. So if you're going to pursue like an educational thing, I think that, if you want to live a happy life, then one of the things you can pursue your life if you never have any like higher aspirations or anything, and that's kind of a classist thing to say, isn't it? Like higher aspirations, like to have a career rather than to just fix stuff. But I think it's perfectly honorable and perfectly good to just, if you're pursuing a specific type of education, pursue something like, being a mechanic, being an electrician, having practical knowledge that has no downside and doesn't force you to think about the more negative aspects of life. I think that's a great type of knowledge to have. The third type I think is pretty useful is what I would call, for lack of a better term, defensive knowledge. It's anything that helps shield you from harm, or more specifically manipulations in life, because any type of knowledge about pyramid schemes, social manipulations, how people might manipulate you emotionally, that's helpful. It helps you shield yourself from harm, which is why I put it under the umbrella of defensive knowledge. But this one is kind of problematic, because knowing too much and thinking too much about the ways in which you might be manipulated by people in the world can lead to, paranoia and, moreover, misanthropy, which is sort of dislike or distrust for your fellow human beings, which is not what you want. So, having just a basic level of, defensive knowledge about, how to protect yourself from manipulations or schemes or what have you is very good, of course, but I don't think you want to ruminate on this too much. And the same goes for the fourth kind of knowledge that I enumerate here, which is emotional intelligence. It's good in small doses because you'll get very far. You'll have a pretty happy life if you can understand and, more importantly, empathize with other people. If you can be a shoulder for them to cry on, if you can offer them sound advice, if you can give them emotionally what they want. But of course, if you make yourself extremely available to everybody and their their emotions and their sadness, then you'll inadvertently or invariably rather see sadness out in the world, and you'll see how it affects everybody negatively, and that's quite unfortunate as well. So again, you don't want to ruminate on this too much, but it is valuable to have to sort of ease your way through the world. But let's talk about negative knowledge now. Let's talk about what the most detrimental kind of knowledge to have is, I think. And as you might guess, it's probably what I would term as conceptual knowledge, high concept things and things that make you think about yourself and just how insignificant you are in the grand scheme of the universe. The danger here is not just one thing, it's twofold actually, because the knowledge itself diminishes your quality of happiness and quality of life, I think, and the overthinking that comes with having a lot of high concepts and different philosophies competing for space in your head, and I can attest to this personally, of course. The dissonance that comes with that creates a lot of overthinking in your brain, which makes it hard to have a simple life, makes it hard to make decisions, and generally adds nothing to your life except for trivial knowledge. Because eventually, of course, you'll just wind up gravitating towards one form of a philosophy or another, probably existentialism or absurdism, or some kind of moral relativism, and you're going to have all these other philosophies in your head, and you're never going to be able to, you'll always be unsure because you exist in a morally relativistic plane now, and you can never go back. You'll always be unsure about yourself. You'll always lose that sense of footing that more simple people have. And I don't say simple as, and I don't mean intellectually very, very stupid. I just mean people who live more of a surface level existence and don't think about high-minded philosophical concepts and don't think about their own mortality and their place in the universe. People like, jocks and, millionaire playboys and stuff like that, as obnoxious as we find them as a society and as obnoxious as intelligent people find them and as vapid as we find them, they are in a way lucky because, of course, they have their own sets of problems. But, having a simple middle-class life, I think, where you don't think about these high concepts and mortality would probably be the best outcome, even if, people who were snooty and intellectual might look down on you and think you are a bit simple. I just think that, in this context, I'm saying the word simple in a sort of an envious way, not they're stupid way, because a simple person, as I'm defining them here, would probably not be as intelligent as I am, but they would also be free from so many of the problems that I have. So I'm saying it in an envious way. As enjoyable for me as the discovery of different philosophies once was, and taking them apart and debating them and stuff, high-minded concepts with no definitive answers about life ultimately lead to disappointment. It's like tearing apart a beautiful poem, and so coincidentally that's something you would also do in school as well. Often you would dissect the symbolism and the meaning of a poem as if it weren't enough to just enjoy its beauty for itself, as if the intellectual pursuit were somehow more important than just appreciating it on a simpler emotional level. Learning, as I said, different perspectives and different philosophies, none of which offer definitive answers, it destroys one's simpler, purer, more adaptable ideas of life. You can have, simpler ideas of right and wrong. I think that having an extremely adaptable, almost naive outlook on life is far better and is what I would choose, could I do it all again, rather than the overly analytical outlook that I have on life right now. Like I said, overthinking is no fun. And, overthinking is no fun. And just knowledge of things like like determinism, for example, does nothing to add to my life. It simply undermines my belief in my own power to change and, change myself and change the world around me and make my sphere of influence a better place. What did I gain from losing that by, coming to learn about determinism and, feeling that was correct? Nothing. People are far better off believing in this simple, naive notion of free will and not seeing themselves as a collection of sentient meat driven by impulses. Then they can never make any different choices than the ones they've made. So, determinism added nothing to my life, as fascinating as I find it, and as fascinating as I find the discrepancy between how we live and how we experience the world versus the actual reality of determinism. So, as interesting as I find that, I would trade it all in a second to have a more naive view. And, maybe you think I'm intellectually a coward for that. Maybe you think I'm trying to opt out of the difficulties of life, and you would be absolutely right. I would absolutely, I wasn't, again, this all goes back to antinatalism as well. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask for an intellect. I didn't ask for an intellectual life, a life of curiosity, a life of, dismantling every sort of thing presented before me. I would absolutely trade that for simplicity at this point, and I think I'll probably feel that way for the rest of my life. Because, as I said, philosophical pursuits just lead you down the path, generally speaking, unless you're a religious person, lead you down the path of moral relativism and existentialism or absurdism. And, you enter a world where people have to create their own meaning in a meaningless world. But how many people actually achieve that? How many people achieve that level of self-actualization within the system of these existential philosophies? How many people are satisfied with the meaning they create in their own lives? I don't think many. I believe that once you see yourself as that Sisyphean character, pushing that stone up the hill every day only to have it rolled down again, there's no turning back. Once you see yourself that way, there is no turning back. And I would do many things to undo that realization for myself. And I'm not the first person to say this, but intellectual people are often plagued with a lot of self-doubt, far more self-doubt than people who are confident almost to the point of arrogance, because intellectual people can never be sure of themselves. You can never be sure as a simpleton or as a simpler person once you're in that highly intellectual, high concept, morally relativistic landscape. And it's really not doing you any favors, because all you really see, the knowledge you ultimately gain, is how everybody is just clueless, flailing about in the void, and so are you. And it doesn't add anything to your life. I don't think there is anything intrinsically valuable about coming to perceive the world in a more accurate way, if that more accurate way is detrimental to you. I would rather have the rose-colored glasses on and never take them off. But of course, once you see yourself without them, no going back. Once you see yourself truly as you are, and you see everybody else as everybody else is. Like I said, the only way to avoid that problem, I think, as an intelligent person, is to just be arrogant, which, is actually, in and of itself detrimental to navigating the world and being, easy to deal with, unless perhaps you can achieve wealth and a cult of personality like Kanye West or somebody like that. And on a similar note, political knowledge doesn't help either, because political knowledge just lets you ultimately see how corrupt and ineffective the systems around you are, how people of every political stripe are prone to abuse of power, war crimes, backroom dealings, and how remote any of their interests are from your own. And, personally, I think the best case scenario, the best outcome, is to just be a person who is equipped to react to whatever life might throw at them. A person who never thinks of death, who never worries about things they can't change, is the living embodiment of the serenity prayer, essentially. Accepts the things they cannot change and changes the things they cannot accept, and never fails in their belief to affect the world in a positive way. And has the wisdom to know the difference, of course, is the end of that serenity prayer. But not particularly ambitious either is I think the best. Like, having a modicum of ambition, being completely moderate, middle of the road in terms of your life, is, I think, the way to do it. It would be a surface level existence, as I've said, but you would glide on that surface effortlessly, to continue that metaphor. You would slide through life happy, getting along with pretty much everybody, and ultimately pass away and not think about death until it was right at your doorstep, and rather than, spending your entire life fearing it, as I probably will. Religion is a helpful tool to do that as well, to not think of death and to not worry about that. And honestly, I think that I would prefer to have been religious if I could also have chosen to be a person who would never question it. I think that, as sad as I see people who, who are religious and are indoctrinated at a young age and never question it, I think they're sort of intellectually cowardly. I would choose that if I could. I would opt for that if I could go back and erase my brain, erase my contrarian nature, and just be the non-questioning person who would believe in a God who would save me after I died, and be like, oh, God's going to save me. I'm going to be a good person. Simple as that. I'm never going to worry about death. That would be pretty great. I had a friend once who said that he would, if he had a child, he would, put on this religious charade and convince his child of the existence of God and of the benefits of organized religion. And I thought that was horrible. And I would never do that to a child of mine if I, unfortunately had one. But, I understand his position a lot more now, because it is, being simple and having all your morals come from an external infallible source is probably preferable than, having to create your own meaning in an inherently meaningless and hostile often world. So I think that's better, and I understand his position a lot more now, though I still wouldn't make that choice if I had a kid. I would subject them to I wouldn't make it torturous, of course, but I wouldn't lie to them. I believe that, parents shouldn't lie to their child except for their child's immediate safety. But yeah, I think the best thing, as I've been saying, is just to be a sort of a sheltered, moderate person. No politics, not really that ambitious, just happy, surrounded by a loving community and family, content to never look outside that bubble. And if you spend your life in that bubble, intelligent people may, look down on you and thumb their nose at you and say, you have a very sheltered life. But really, I think that there's always a little bit of envy in that. As for somebody who might embody these values in my own life, I think that probably my father embodies a lot of these values more than anybody else. He has tons of that practical and mechanical knowledge, and, he doesn't let people take advantage of him really, and has enough emotional intelligence, to, get by in, a basic workplace and family setting as well. So he embodies these values, and, even though he had his own problems as a kid, as I talked about in a previous video, he hasn't had a pain-free life. But if you could, isolate these concepts and teach them to a younger person or a new generation of young people and foster these qualities within them early on, they might be free of most of life's pains. And, again, it all ties into antinatalism, trying to avoid pain for those who are here and trying not to create more people who will experience pain. Some people, of course, the problem is that this is a very sort of white middle class ideology. A lot of people will never get even the chance to experience that sort of sheltered, simple life, much less last it their whole lives. Growing up in poverty or with an absent parent, that type of shit throws you right into an inescapable mess of social and political hardship, experiencing systematic oppression and racism or sexism or transphobia will certainly jar you out of that simple life. So this is a very, straight, white, cis, ideology, but that's why it's so important to have rights for all people. That's why it's so important to have social support so nobody grows up in abject poverty. And, moreover, it's more argument for antinatalism to just not have a kid and just feel like you're freeing the next generation from the pains of existence. My life is not improved, I think, to sort of sum this video up. My life has not been improved by the knowledge of, for example, my whole sad family lineage that brought me here. My life has not been improved by the fact that of knowing that my parents are abject failures and that much of my own misery is brought on either by the genetics they gave me or by my choice, quote unquote, to refuse to fail in love how they failed. And that choice now keeps me isolated and waiting for something that may never come. To sum it all up, though, The grass, of course, is always greener on the other side. I'm sure simple people want to be smart just as much as smart people want to be a little bit simpler and not think about all the things that float around in their mind troubling them. I'm sure being a simpler person would have its downsides that I would discover doing that. And that's why I talked about that dream state at the beginning of the video, because, ideally I would, want to exist in that sort of lucid dream where I could, of course, keep my intelligence and still have the perfect world that I would create for myself. But in lieu of that, while that's medically impossible, and, I would much rather, I think, go through life without thinking about death and being afraid until it's very near. I would much rather believe in compassion and goodness and truly believe I'm in a world where I can put those things out into the world and receive them from other people, and that all people are sort of operating on the same basic moral framework. That's what I would like to believe. To believe in compassion and goodness and not fear. I would trade almost all of my knowledge for that. And that's, again, if you think I'm intellectually a coward for that, then that's absolutely fine. I'm guilty as charged, because that's the sad truth. I would trade almost anything for that simplicity. But anyway, I have been obviously Jesus. I will see you next week. I think next week I'm going to do, while it's still fresh in my mind, I might actually record it early. I might actually do a video talking about my experience that I had over the weekend about, using a sensory deprivation or a flotation tank. That's something I've always wanted to do. I'll talk about it, my expectations versus the reality of it, what I think its benefits could be for physical and especially psychological medicine, if any. So I did that just the other day, and I'm going to talk about that. I've only done it once, but I want to give my first impressions on that, and then we'll get back to some more suggestions from 69er, who submitted a bunch a couple weeks ago, and I will probably be talking in 2 weeks about consequentialism. We're also overdue for another Cooking with Christ, and my music recommendation for this week is a new Mountain Goats EP called Hex of Infinite Binding. I'm about to have a coughing fit. I'm obviously just. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.